I manage a beachfront cafe in Da Nang. And last month, this retired couple from Phoenix planted themselves at a table for 3 hours because they thought Vietnamese coffee shops worked like American Starbucks with free refills and Wi-Fi passwords. The husband kept waving his empty cup at my staff, saying, "We're still working here, just top us off," while his wife had spreadsheets covering 2 tables. When I finally explained that one coffee means one coffee and we needed the table for actual lunch customers, he pulled out a calculator to show me how much revenue they'd generate if you just understood the customer lifetime value model. It spent 40,000 dong total. That's $1.75. For 3 hours. His wife asked if we had a corporate complaints department. My cousin in Lisbon texted me last week about a retirement group that showed up to Belém, expecting the monastery to have elevator access and climate control because Europe's supposed to be modern. Woman sat on a stone bench and refused to move until someone brought her ice water with exactly 4 cubes. Another retiree tried to tip a security guard 20 euros to let him touch a UNESCO-protected tile wall for a photo. When told it wasn't allowed, he said, "In America, $20 gets you pretty much anywhere." Then got legitimately confused when the guard called over a supervisor instead of pocketing the cash. My cousin said they spent 40 minutes explaining why you can't just pay your way past preservation laws, and the guy kept insisting that customer service means flexibility. They'd traveled 6,000 miles to argue about touching old tiles. I work at a resort in Hoi An, and we've had American retirees bring their own ranch dressing bottles to our restaurant and ask us to store them in our kitchen fridge because they can't eat Vietnamese food without it. One couple brought a 12-pack of Kraft singles. Another woman shipped herself a case of Cheerios and got angry about the import customs fee, telling our concierge that Vietnam needs to understand Americans have dietary requirements. These are people who specifically moved here for the culture. My brother runs a retirement visa service in Hanoi. And last year, he had a client from Seattle who brought a 70-page binder to his appointment, with tabs for negotiation tactics, local price, points, and cultural workarounds. Man sat down and immediately started explaining that he'd researched the Asian bargaining system and knew that my brother's quoted fee was inflated by at least 40% because that's how business works in this part of the world. He slid across a handwritten counteroffer that was half the actual price, then leaned back with his arms crossed like he'd just won a chess match. My brother explained that the fees were set by Vietnamese immigration law and posted on government websites in multiple languages. The man tapped his binder and said, "Right, but that's the tourist price. I'm going to be a resident." He genuinely believed that government visa fees operated on a haggling system and that his binder research had cracked some kind of secret code. My brother processed his application at the exact posted price, and the man left a 1-star review saying the service refused to honor local customs. I teach Portuguese classes to foreigners in Porto, and last month a retired teacher from Virginia spent the entire first session correcting my pronunciation because she'd done Duolingo for 6 months and knew how the language should sound. Every time I introduced a new phrase, she'd interrupt with, "Actually, the app says it's pronounced this way," then repeat it with an aggressively American accent. When I gently explained that I was born in Porto and had spoken Portuguese for 40 years, she said, "I understand. But technology doesn't have regional bias." She wanted me to teach the class using her phone app as the primary reference. By week 3, she'd stopped coming and left a review, complaining that the instructor wasn't following standardized Portuguese protocols and that she'd learned more accurate pronunciation from a cartoon. Ow. My sister works at a banking branch in Cascais, and she processed an account opening for a retiree from Colorado who brought printed screenshots of American banking apps as proof that Portuguese banks were doing it wrong. He laid out 6 pages showing mobile check deposit, instant transfers, and 24/7 phone support, then asked when our bank would implement these basic features. My sister explained that Portugal's banking system operates differently, with more in-person verification and different transfer protocols. The man shook his head and said, "That's exactly the kind of inefficiency that drives business to competitors. In 5 years, You'll all be scrambling to catch up to American standards. He was genuinely trying to explain competitive banking strategy to a bank. Employee in a country with one of the lowest fraud rates in Europe. He opened his account, then came back 3 times that month to check on progress toward implementing instant mobile deposits.
Ow.
Worked security at a government office in Quingbra. And we had a retired businessman from Texas try to bring his emotional support dog into the building for a residency appointment. When I explained that pets aren't allowed in government offices, except for certified service animals with specific documentation, he pulled out a laminated card from a website and said, "This is legal paperwork." My therapist said he's medical equipment. I told him that Portugal has different laws about service animals and that comfort animals don't have public access rights here. He responded with, "Are you saying Portugal doesn't recognize American medical documents?" Then threatened to call the embassy because his civil rights were being violated. He genuinely believed that an online certificate from a website would override Portuguese law. His wife eventually took the dog back to their apartment, and he spent his entire appointment telling the immigration officer that Portugal needed to update its disability accommodation policies to match international standards. Manage a traditional Vietnamese restaurant in Hue, and last month a retired couple from Florida asked me to prepare pho with no weird ingredients, just normal broth. When I asked what they meant by weird, they listed fish sauce, star anise, coriander, and ginger, basically everything that makes pho actual pho. The husband said, "We like Asian food, just the American version that doesn't have all the authentic stuff." They wanted me to make beef soup with nothing but beef and water, then call it pho. I explained that removing those ingredients would create an entirely different dish, and the wife said, "Right," but adapted for people who actually want to eat it. She suggested I create a special Western menu with normal versions of Vietnamese dishes. They're the type of people who moved to Vietnam specifically for the food culture, then got upset that the food was too Vietnamese. My uncle owns a pastelaria in Alfama, and he had a regular customer from Arizona who started leaving 1-star reviews because we don't have sugar-free options. Every review mentioned that modern bakeries accommodate dietary choices, that we were stuck in outdated business models. The man came in weekly to buy regular pasties de nata, then complained online that we weren't catering to health-conscious customers. My uncle finally asked him why he kept buying pastries covered in sugar if he wanted sugar-free options. The man explained that he liked the taste, but we should offer alternatives for when he's being good. Traditional Portuguese bakery that's been operating since 1892 to reformulate century-old recipes because he personally couldn't control his pastry consumption. His latest review said we're resistant to customer feedback and innovation. I work at a coffee shop in Hoi An, and we had a retired woman from Michigan spend 20 minutes explaining that our prices were wrong because she'd done the math on cost of goods. She'd apparently researched wholesale coffee prices and calculated that our co-fei soi da should cost no more than 15,000 dong based on ingredient costs plus reasonable markup. Our actual price was 35,000. She had a spreadsheet. When I explained that pricing includes rent, labor, equipment, and other overhead costs, she said I owned a business in Detroit. I know how margins work, and you're overcharging. She genuinely believed that her experience running a completely different business in a completely different country qualified her to audit our pricing structure. She continued ordering coffee at our inflated prices while telling other customers that we were taking advantage of foreigners who don't know better. The irony was completely lost on her. I manage a wine bar in the Douro Valley, and last year we hosted a retirement group that brought their own wine to pair with our food because they'd heard Portuguese wine was too dry. They'd shipped 6 bottles of California Chardonnay and asked our sommelier to open and serve them. When I explained that we don't allow outside alcohol and that we specialize in local wine pairings, one woman said, "We're paying for the food, so we should be able to drink what we want," another suggested. "We charge a corking fee like normal restaurants do." I told them that bringing wine to a wine bar in wine country was roughly equivalent to bringing your own lobster to a seafood restaurant in Maine. They left. Posted a review saying we were inflexible and unwelcoming to Americans, then asked if we knew any restaurants that would respect customer preferences. They'd traveled to one of the world's premier wine regions specifically to avoid drinking wine from that region. I drive a taxi in Hanoi, and last month I picked up a retired couple from their service department to take them to the old quarter. 15-minute drive through busy streets. The husband spent the entire ride critiquing my route, saying GPS shows a faster way while holding up his phone. I explained that GPS doesn't account for Hanoi's actual traffic patterns, one-way streets, and constantly changing construction zones. He said, "Technology doesn't lie. You're taking the long way to jack up the fare." The meter reached 60,000 dong, about 250. He handed me exact change and said no tip. Until you learn to follow the most efficient route. His wife took a photo of my license plate in case we need to file a complaint. They're the type of people who moved to Southeast Asia, then got angry that a local driver with 20 years experience knew the roads better than their 3DO Google Maps app. My cousin works at the train station in Sintra, and she sold tickets to a retiree from Oregon who got genuinely upset that the historic tram doesn't have air conditioning or USB charging ports. He asked to speak to management about modernizing the experience because tourists expect certain amenities. My cousin explained that the tram is a heritage railway designed to preserve historical transportation. He said history's great, but comfort is non-negotiable. Disney figured this out decades ago. He wanted a UNESCO World Heritage Site to install Wi-Fi and phone chargers in century-old railway cars. He bought his ticket, rode the tram, then posted a review comparing it unfavorably to theme park attractions and suggesting that Portugal invests in customer experience upgrades. He'd specifically traveled to see historical sites, then complained that they were too historical. I teach English at a language school in Dalat, and last year a retired professor from Boston enrolled in my Vietnamese class, then spent every session explaining why Vietnamese grammar didn't make sense compared to Romance languages. He'd interrupt lessons to say things like, "But why don't you have verb conjugations? Every developed language has conjugations." When I explained that Vietnamese uses a different linguistic structure with classifiers and tonal inflections, he said, "Right, but that seems inefficient for modern communication." He genuinely believed that a language spoken by 100 million people was somehow structurally flawed because it didn't match Latin-based patterns he was familiar with. He lasted 5 weeks before dropping out and telling people that Vietnamese was impossible to learn properly without a complete grammatical overhaul. I work at a tourist information desk in Lagos, and we had a retired couple from Nevada ask for directions to the beach that's not too beachy. They wanted sand and ocean views, but no waves. No seaweed, no salt smell, no crowds, and no sun exposure after 2 p.m. When I suggested they might enjoy the calmer waters of a bay or a pool at their hotel, the wife said we didn't come all the way to Portugal to sit by a pool. We want the authentic beach experience, just comfortable. They wanted me to recommend a beach that had removed everything that makes a beach a beach. I gave them directions to 3 different locations based on their contradictory requirements. And they came back the next day to report that none of them were right, and that Portuguese beaches don't really cater to people who want to relax. They're retired in a country with over 1,000 miles of coastline, and somehow every beach was wrong. I'm back at my cafe in Da Nang, and the same couple from Phoenix came in yesterday to ask if we'd considered their feedback about the refill policy. They've been here 3 months now. The husband brought a printout of coffee shop business models from American franchise websites and wanted to walk me through implementation strategies that could increase our revenue by 40%. His wife mentioned they're thinking about staying another year because someone needs to help local businesses understand modern service standards. They ordered 1 coffee between them and stayed for 2 hours. When they left, they pushed the chairs back under the table and said, "You're welcome," like they'd done me a favor. My cousin in Lisbon says his retirement group is planning a return trip next year. They've already sent the monastery a list of accessibility suggestions that includes installing an elevator shaft through the 16th century stone structure and adding a cafe. With American-style coffee, one couple asked if they could sponsor a modernization fund to help Portugal catch up with visitor expectations. They genuinely think they're helping.